Good morning, good evening, everyone. Hopefully I am audible. So this is our annual webinar that we do at the start of the interview preparation season, and we'll talk about what the season entails, how you should prepare for it, and what are the typical pitfalls. This is obviously open to anyone and everyone, and we'll post it on our YouTube channel as well. So before we proceed, let's get some introductions from our panel, and then we'll dive into why the interviews are so important, make or break, some of the important questions, and then typical mistakes that IMGs tend to make and which you should avoid. And then we'll open up for questions after the session. All right, so in terms of introductions, my name is Pavan. You may have seen me in other YouTube videos from our team. I'm adjunct faculty at Carnegie Mellon in Healthcare Analytics. And I'll also walk you through some of the other things that our team does here. So let me go around the table. Rahul.
Hi, good morning or good evening, everyone. My name is Rahul Banala. I'm a gastroenterologist, and the goal over the next 30 to 45 minutes is to sort of give you a broad overview of, things that you would want to avoid and how to sort of start wrapping your mind around thinking about the interviews and thinking about how to go about the interviews. So hopefully this will be helpful and will sort of spur you on to think about this carefully. So pass it on to Jaydeep.
Hi, good morning or good evening, wherever you're located. So I'm Jaydeep Mishra, and I've been a Sathi student, and I'm pursuing my internal medicine residency in New York. More than happy to help anybody and everybody who can value from this discussion.
Thanks, Jaydeep. George, do you want to go?
Hi, my name is George. I've been a Sathi student and I'm a radiology resident. I'm happy to discuss some of the important things to look out for during interviews and answer any questions you may have.
All right, Chinta.
Yeah. Hi guys, my name is Chinta. I also used to be a Sathi student. I'm a currently second-year internal medicine resident. We do this every year, and there's a lot of things that we come across every year in terms of what students make mistakes usually, and we'll try to point out and let you all know why is this important and what you should do if you're faced with certain situations during the interview.
Thank you, Chinta. And Rana, I did see you briefly on the video, but do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself if you're still able to hear us? Maybe not. Maybe she just disconnected. She's trying. So we'll see as she comes back. All right. For those of you, I see many of our students on the chat, but for those of you who don't know us, our team helps you in almost every phase of the USMLE other than the exams. So whether it is the rotations, whether it is, obviously the RAS application, personal statement, program outreach, which programs to apply to, rotations, interview preparation, of course, that is why we are here today, post-interview communication, and of course SOAP, and eventually the final match. And I think, Rana, you are visible now. Can you hear us, Rana?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll get started.
Yeah. So I'm Reina Garg. I just completed my internal medicine residency from Mount Sinai. I wanted to help give back, so I want to be able to share everything that I learned during my application cycle, during my interview cycle. I mean, I've gone through this process twice now, and I've had lots of interviews. So just some tips, techniques, what to expect, and some common questions that I encountered. I'll be starting my preventive cardiology fellowship soon, and let's see where it goes from there.
Thank you. So, as you may know, we have a very diverse panel of residents attending, journalists, and all that. You can look up our website for those of you who are interested. In terms of our student profile, we've helped over 700 students now as of last season, not counting this season. Over 20 countries, pretty much most specialties, including some of the tough ones, as you can see. Score range varies from multiple attempts to very high scores. Year of graduation also varies for our students. So we get a whole range of students we can help. Before I get started in terms of the interview preparation, how we go about it, there are obviously mock interviews. There are classes. There is one-on-one advisory. We help you in rank order list. Program outreach, we do it in a closed Telegram group. And we also have program-specific guidance and interview preparation. And we are now, of course, enrolling. For those of you who may be interested, you can reach out, or we can talk after the season, after this webinar, or towards the end. But I don't want to, take all the time talking about ourselves. So let's dive into it. Importance of the interview, and I think this is you, Rahul.
Yeah. So I'm going to speak for the next few minutes. My job is to, or my goal is to sort of get your minds wrapped around the importance of forming in an interview. And, this is somewhat unique, where depending on where you went to medical school, you probably took an exam and did well on the exam and got into medical school, and then took an exam, or would take an exam and get into residency. But this process is much more comprehensive, I think, and I think you have to sort of think through it. So even before I get into the data and everything, you don't need me to tell you that it's a very competitive process, and you need to do everything you can to be able to succeed in this process, right? So let's look at the data for the competition, and then I'll sort of give you some big picture overview. So this is data from NRMP. This depends on which year's data you look at. An average program has about 10 to 14 possessions in the match. They get roughly about 2,000 interviews. And going from the 2,000, they interview about 220. Roughly there is a 1 in 10 drop here. So depending on which year's data you look at, the numbers may vary slightly. But the point being, there's only about 1 in 10 individuals who apply or actually call for an interview. And once, roughly about 80% or 90% of them are interviewed, and only about 60 to 70% of people who are interviewed are actually ranked. So your job, in this application process over the next couple of weeks, as you put in your application, is to make sure your application is as good as possible, and it gets you from this 2,000 or 3,000 applications that the program receives down to, preferably the 220, and eventually to be in the top of this group. Now, this graph shows how many applications are rejected based on a standardized screening process. So you put in your application, they put in through an electronic program, and, if you don't meet their criteria, they don't actually look at it. It could be an electronic program, or it could be like a non-physician review. So only about a third to half, I would say about a third of applications truly receive an in-depth review. When I say in-depth review, it means that a person is actually physically looking at your application and probably spending 3 to 5 minutes looking at the whole package. Okay, so your application has to be perfect. It has to be easy for the reader. It has to be really, stand out. But when you actually look at so if you look at the application process, your application and everything that you put in is designed to get you to the interview. Since today the discussion is about the interview, the best way to think about the interview is this. Everything that you've done so far, right, all your exams, all the hard work you've put in medical school, everything that you've done, your observerships and everything, basically gets you the interview, and now you have 20 minutes with each person, maybe with 3 to 5 people, to really prove yourself, right? You've got to get your game on during that day. Otherwise, it really doesn't matter. Because once you get the interview, remember, it becomes a level playing field. Now you have to prove yourself. So everybody sitting with you that day is going to have pretty much the same qualifications that you're going to have, right? About the same scores, about the same everything else. So your job that day is to say, okay, this is a new, it's a new game. We're going to start from scratch, and I'm going to have to prove myself all over again today, right? So you have to kind of go in with that attitude, and that's what's going to let you succeed. Because once you go in there, look at how programs rank applicants. The most important factor is how you interact with faculty, how you interact with others when you visit, what your interpersonal skills are, how you interact with the residents. If you talk to residents, what kind of feedback are they getting? And then it comes to your credentials, your scores, your letters, things like that. Okay? So really, once you get your foot in the door, once you get that interview, you really have to bring your game on and to perform. So from a big picture perspective, what I would say is the time interview preparation and is something that takes time. It's not something that you suddenly wake up after you get your interviews and say, yes, now I'm going to prepare for my interviews. It is something that you start right now. It is a process. Many of you may or may not be used to taking interviews. And the way you approach these interviews are also different. This is not them asking you questions and you're the student trying to answer the questions. It's going to be a conversation. So you have to be able to have an intelligent and confident conversation, and so you really have to start now. Okay, so I'll hand it over to Pawan.
Yep, thank you, Rahul. So I think now let's jump into the interview day, what to expect, and some of the typical questions. So I think, Rana, that's you're going to talk about some of this.
Yeah. So some of the things you can expect when on your actual interview day. You would have received an email. You would have you would have arranged how to get there by your interview day. When you first get there, they're going to try their best to make you comfortable. So everyone is going to be friendly. The program coordinator will probably introduce herself or himself. They're going to give you a presentation on their program. So they're going to try to ease you into the interview process. So whatever reservations you had when you first went in, they're going to slowly start dissipating. Then the actual interviews begin. There's usually at least 2, sometimes up to 5 to 6. Each interview is similar. And I've noticed in all the interviews that I've went to that there's 2 types of interviewers. One of them would be the type of interviewers who have gone through your profile. They like you as a candidate, so they're just going to kind of reiterate everything that's in your CV. They're going to just ask you, tell me about yourself, and you're just going to have to go through whatever you've written in your profile. Then there are those interviewers who kind of, I guess, they operate a little bit on the deficiency model. So they have some kind of reservation or some kind of question on your application, and they're going to focus on that. So I'm just going to give you a list of things that you can expect that will definitely be asked, and some other things that you may be asked. So the first set of questions are the questions that they ask to kind of get to know you as a candidate. The most typical one is tell me about yourself. You can expect this in every single interview. By the time you're done with your first 2 or 3, depending on how many you get, this answer will be, this is an answer you should prepare. Tell me about yourself. They might have a specific question based on your personal statement, or they might just leave it out in the open. So you should have an answer for this. Another typical question you can expect is, what made you apply to our program? Again, depending on whether this is a community or a research program, you would want to tailor your answer to that. They'll ask you why you like the specialty, your chosen specialty. Again, this is a little bit of a hard one, but this is, again, a question that you should have a ready answer to. Why do you like internal medicine? Why do you like pediatrics? Another typical one that I found was asked a lot was, explain yourself in a leadership role. There's a big focus these days on doctors taking up leadership roles. They want to know if you're one of those, or if you have an idea of where you think your strengths lie and where you would want to take a leadership role based on what you've done in the past, based on what your interest is. So this is something you should have a fair idea of. The other thing is gaps in your resume. If you have a lot of if you have years and years of, a gap, or you're many years out of your medical school, then they'll ask you to explain those gaps. I guess what they want to hear during this time is that you were doing something productive. They don't really like to hear that you spent a year studying for your USMLEs. So you can say that you spent some of that time studying for the USMLEs, but also try to get some, try to fill in those gaps with clinical work. Another one that I was asked in almost every interview that I went to, whether it was for residency or fellowship, is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? They kind of want to get a sense of whether their program is good for you in terms of what your career goals are, and whether you have a plan. It's always okay to say that this is what I think I want to do. It might change during residency, which is expected, but you should still have a fair idea of where you see yourself in 5 years. Do you want to be working at an academic center? Do you want to be, the head of department somewhere? Do you want to just be, do you want to be a primary care physician working in, a rural setting? You just should have an idea, and why. Another question that I was asked a lot is, why did you choose New York, or why did you choose, Michigan? Wherever you're interviewing, why did you, like if you get an interview in South Dakota, why did you choose South Dakota? A lot of people, as IMGs, sometimes we apply very widely. We don't think about, we're not too selective. But a lot of the interviewers, especially if you go to places like, maybe the Midwest in South Dakota or something like that, they won't understand that. They think that you have really thought it through. So wherever you're going to apply, you should kind of have an answer about why you chose that particular area. Another question is, fellowship or primary care. Obviously, you want to tailor this answer a little bit to where you're interviewing. You don't have to say, I'm not interested in a fellowship at all. If you're going to a community program, you can just say that, yes, I'm interested in this, but I want to, I want to use the patient volume, or I want to get the experience of a community hospital and apply it to my fellowship. It all depends on how you tie in everything to your future career goals. And the last one is obviously hobbies. This is a lighter question. They'll discuss, what you've written as your hobbies, why you enjoy doing it. This is something that usually you're able to talk about. So these are the common questions that they're going to ask you to just kind of get to know you as a candidate. The second set of questions that they ask is sort of to get a sense of your character and your integrity. So a common question that I was asked is a mistake that you made and then you learned from. You want to be honest here. You don't want to make it seem, oh, like my mistake was working way too hard, because that's not really a mistake, and they look for that, they listen for that. So you want to be honest. You obviously don't want to make it sound like some kind of horrible mistake where you compromise patient safety or something, but a genuine mistake and what you learned from it. They want to hear how you overcame it. Obviously, 3 strengths, 3 weaknesses. This is a question that most of us know, that will be asked. I've found that programs these days are kind of tailoring this question into something more specific, but I have been asked this from time to time. Another question that I was asked in a number of programs was a difficult situation that I faced and how was I able to overcome it. So this is a little different from, a mistake that I made, just any difficult situation, whether it was, a conflict at work. There's a lot of questions these days that are kind of focused on conflict management. A conflict with a superior, how would you manage it? Or a question I was asked was that your senior made a mistake and there's a medical student there on the team with you, how would you handle that situation? So they just want to see how your conflict management skills are. Then another kind of question that I've been asked is, I'm not sure why they asked this, maybe it's a little bit of, to get into your psyche. If you could write a book on anything, what would it be? And of course, like, you can't, these are just one of the questions I was asked. It's not, you can't really prepare for this. You're going to have to do some on-the-spot thinking. But just anticipate you might be asked a question like this. Another one I was asked is, if you could meet any character, live, fictional, dead, who would it be and why? So I think they just want to kind of get a sense of, just the way you think. And I've also been asked, if you could be any animal, then what would you be? So I feel like these are some psyche questions that some programs like to ask. The last set of questions that usually programs won't go to this, but they might, is where they kind of assess your medical competency. The most common one is an interesting case. A lot of times this is just to see how you present the case and how you kind of thought through it and all of that stuff. This is one that you should have ready. Sometimes they're even more specific and they're like, oh, tell me an interesting ID case that you saw, or tell me an interesting, depending on who's interviewing you. So, just have a little bit of an idea of an interesting case you want to present. Maybe a case that has some aspects of every specialty in it. Sometimes, IMGs especially, are asked about their electives. There are interviewers out there that know that sometimes, IMGs go for paid externships and they go for, paid experience. And I was asked this in one of my interviews that, a lot of these experiences are paid. How would you explain that? So you can always say that, it doesn't really, how you get as an IMG, it's difficult to get experience. So you get experience in the way that you can, but what you do with it and what you make of it depends on you. And I think they're okay with that answer. They will understand. Then another question is on the research that you've done, research that you're planning on doing, and how you're planning on continuing this research as you go on. So this is, this depends on you, what you've mentioned in your CV, what you've already done. Just be ready to talk about your research and the results. You're often asked on the EMR to see if, if you've ever worked with an EMR, if you'll be able to learn. That, again, is pretty much a yes-no question. Sometimes they'll ask you about your LORs. They'll say you've gotten very strong LORs. What do you think? What do you think that you did that that made someone write such a strong LOR for you? So again, they're just trying to assess your medical competency in that way. So yeah, I think these are the most common questions that I've encountered. Obviously, when the interview prep starts, if you were to join, then we would go over some of these answers. But these are some questions you can expect to be asked.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, Anna. This is very comprehensive. Appreciate it. Now let's move on to some of the typical mistakes that IMGs tend to make, starting with either inflating their CVs, PAs, and padding these things up and those kind of behavior. And let's go to George. George, I know you wanted to talk about the mistakes in content and, how the content is presented and articulated.
Thank you, Pawan. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yep.
All right. So this is a very common issue that we have. We get we have a good profile, we submit our CV, we get the interview, and we're at the interview, and there's no change that you can make on your CV once you certify it, and there you're stuck if you have a mistake on your CV, and if someone notices it, most likely they will. So I'd like to go step by step on the sections of the CV where most mistakes are made. So starting from after the personal details, the addresses, etc., then comes the membership section. A lot of people don't understand what the membership section means. Membership is not having an account in the AMA or FRIDA website. You don't write member AMA. Okay, so those things are picked up because these things are very common now. Like just because you have an account in the ACP website doesn't mean you're an ACP member. Things like that. If you don't have any, of course, you just need to say that you don't have it. You don't need to write these things, just for the sake of it, because there are people who are asked on this, because just as Dr. Garg said, there are faculty who will be prepared on your CV, and then there will be other interviewers who aren't. So if this is an interviewer who has already read your CV and found this to be interesting, he's a member of the ACP, let me ask him what he's been doing about this, something about the role, because I was asked about a certain experience, and unless you're able to speak about it for a whole 90 seconds, and if you're flustered, then they can easily catch it. Then that sets a whole a tone for your interview. Your integrity may be questioned later on, So you don't want to bring that from such a small point. It might just be that you don't want to leave that space empty, but if you have nothing, just leave it empty, okay? And the next thing is in the experiences. So when we go to volunteer experiences, work experience, or research experiences, there might be experiences. I mean, all those experiences are true. You've done all those experiences, but during your interview, if you're not able to talk about it, if they ask you, tell me about your elective, tell me about this particular elective that you did in New York. If you're not able to talk about it, it leads them to question, were you even active during this elective? What were you doing? Were you very passive? So having a very passive attitude during an elective or rotation, that reflects very poorly on you. And you might not have been passive, but if you're not prepared on that question, or if you're not prepared on telling what exactly was your role, that can put you in a bad light. So the same thing goes with volunteer experience. There are many people, I've recently reviewed a CV where they had like many just fabricated volunteer experiences, things that you've never heard of. And then when you ask them, they say it's online, things like that. So whatever it is, if they doubt one, they're likely to doubt many other things in your CV, and then you might easily be put on the do not rank list. And you don't want that to happen. You've scored an interview with a lot of hard work, and you don't want to lose that precious interview. So whatever you type or whatever you write on your ERA CV has to be accurate. So the recent ERAs, so ERAs has a code for integrity, and they've mentioned that 5% of things mentioned in the ERA CV are fraudulent. So you have to be careful. There are program directors and other residents, faculty who look for these things, so be very careful. Another very funny thing that I saw recently was someone asking if we can say that we don't need a visa, when in fact you need to, and then assuming that at the end of the interview season, if they like you, they will give you a visa. Absolutely not. So visa is a hard filter and probably one of the first filters that ever goes through in a program. If you need a visa, don't assume that they're going to give you a visa if the program definitely says that they're not going to give a visa. So this is, I would say, borderline stupid to assume that a program will give you a visa when they've explicitly said that they won't. But I've seen this. I never expected someone would actually do it, but I feel like I have to say this. The next thing would be in the publications and presentation section. So fraudulent publications, very common, very, very common. If it's not even, if your manuscript is in publication, is in preparation, it's not supposed to be in the publication section. If it's at least been submitted, then you may put it in the other than published section. but not if it's in preparation, in review, literature review. No, none of these things. These things should be discussed in your research experience, if you have such an experience. Otherwise, they're not supposed to be in the publication section, because they're going to ask you about it, or they might even Google it up, and if they don't see it, then, you know, everything beyond that or everything before that can get difficult and uneasy for everyone. So that's so fraudulent publication citations, plagiarism of personal statements. A lot of people do that. They feel like, you know, when we take a few sentences from multiple personal statements, it's not counted as plagiarism. But yes, if they see familiar statements, they have read so many personal statements over the years, these program directors, sometimes they give these personal statements to the chief residents to read. Chief residents have read many more, and if they feel that something is fishy, then it might turn out bad for you, and they might even ask you, or they might not even they might just put you in the not a rank list. So it's, you don't want to bring these situations towards yourself. And another thing, as Dr. Garg had said, a lot of people will ask you about your red flags. So the deal about red flags is you have them. There is no changing your red flag. If your YOG is large, or if you have an attempt, or if you have lower than average scores, all these are red flags, and there's nothing you can do to change it. So being defensive when they ask you about it is not the way to go. That is a very bad thing during the interviews. If you have a red flag, admit it, say what you did to recover from it, or what you did to compensate for it, and then move on. That's it. So it's as simple as that. Everyone appreciate honesty and integrity. No one likes being defensive. You need to own up to your mistakes, own up to your deficiencies. Everyone makes mistakes. So it's not about being defensive or saying, I was sick the previous day, that's what this thing happened. It might have been true, but that's not the way to do it. And another question, I think this is one of the very common questions, where do you see yourself in 5 years, as Dr. Garg said. So a lot of people tend to tailor these answers according to the interviewer. So if the interviewer is a nephrologist and you say that, I want to be a nephrologist in 5 years, then you don't really want to be, that's bad. And then you go and tell the next interviewer, I want to be a hematologist, just like you. Things like that. So these are very simple things. Even though if you use a common sense, you understand that these people would discuss, and if they hear multiple answers from different people, and it just sounds like you have no integrity. So whatever you want to do during your interview, just be honest. You have a fellowship interest, say yes. I'm thinking of this, but I'm open to other ideas. Or I don't have a fellowship interest. I just want to be a hospitalist. Anything you want, just be passionate about why you're there in that program. You have an interview at a certain program, and you're excited about that program. Show that excitement. They appreciate the raw excitement that you have. It should not be a theatrical experience. Even though we are rehearsing for it, the passion or the excitement for that program should be on your face, and that would trump most other doubts in their mind. Yeah, I think that's pretty much covered all the section that I need to say.
Thank you, George. Continuing with the mistakes, let's move on to Chintav. I think you want to talk about the body language or non-serious kind of behavior that we tend to show in the interviews.
Right. So yeah, as we move forward, I just would want to go back to what George said about the visa and lying about that. It actually happened in my program where I am, where an applicant actually lied saying that they had a green card, and when the match results came out, she did not have a green card, and she ended up losing her spot. So again, as he said, never assume the program is not going to sponsor visas if they say no. So lying is not an option. But yeah, since you brought it up, there's real life that people have done it, and I have seen it. So just wanted to bring that up to you also. Never lie about the visa status. All right, so anyways, we're going to talk something about the common body language and communication errors that we do during the interviews. And I'm particularly very big about the body language when it comes to the interviews. We all come from a country that, we get entrance into the medical school based on our scores. There's not a big thing about the interview, and that's why we're not used to it. So that's where we're not used to how to sit in the interview or how to communicate in the interview. Those are some of the common mistakes that everyone has to learn from. And I won't lie if I said that I was very good when I came to this country for the first time. So let's focus on most of the important things that you would actually do on an interview day. One of the things that absolutely is very must is you need to understand that when you are on an interview day, there are people looking at you. You won't even notice, but there are people around, in form of residents, in the form of coordinators, or even in the form of just a med tech. It's just everyone has their opinion in who they want to take, because these are the people you're going to work with for 3 years. So try to interact with everyone. Show them the respect. That's one of the other things that we tend to make mistakes is like, oh, she's just the program coordinator. Oh, okay, well, she's just the tech, I don't need to talk to her. And we tend to go towards people whose opinion is going to matter, but we got to understand that everyone's opinion matters, not just the program director, faculty, or the residents. It's everyone who's there on the interview day. So that's one of the common mistakes I've seen, particularly from IMGs, is they tend to go towards the program directors and residents and try to impress them as much as they can and try to, strike a conversation. But then the real part is that you also got to go to the program coordinator and everyone else who's around you. So that's one common mistake we make. I had the luxury of interviewing like an American predominant programs, like American graduates as well as IMG graduates. One of the things that I have very well noticed is the interactions between the IMGs at a residency program. I know everyone is super competitive. It's a cutthroat competition in the United States to get into residency, but that also shows a lot about you as a person, and that's also being monitored when you don't interact with your peers at a program, like people just sitting next to you. The most common question an IMG would ask is like, hey, how many interviews do you have? Or hey, what are your scores? Those are absolutely the worst questions you really want to ask sitting on an interview day, because let me tell you, people are noticing right there, and you don't really want to do that. That's none of your business. You guys are at the interview. Talk about different stuff. Ask him where he's from. Do that, because when I went to a program that was predominantly American graduates interviewing, you won't even notice that these guys never have known each other. It's so obvious that they get along. They talk about different stuff. They talk about sports. They talk about weather. They talk about city, but the least thing they do is talk about their scores and how many interviews they have. So again, a very important takeaway point: don't matter how good you are, just be very respectful to everyone you see on an interview day, because everyone has a big opinion to form. Also, don't be like a person who's just going to sit on the side on an interview day and not try to communicate with anyone, because, again, I've seen people who are just sitting there taking down notes, and another worst question to ask is like, hey, you just had an interview with the program director. What is he asking in there? And it's just a reflex thing that the IMGs do all the time. It's nothing against you or me. I did it. I never did it, but I learned it. Like, you don't do this, because we do this back home, and it's like, oh yeah, hey, what did they ask you in the room there? So you want to get prepared, and I understand that, but it doesn't work here that way. It's all about spontaneous answers. You can be prepared on every answers you can, but at the end of the day, when you go in there with that guy for 20 minutes, there's going to be a lot of questions that you are not going to be prepared for. So having said that, when you're actually with someone in the room and sitting there, make sure you guys practice about how you sit, the posture, how you look into the, your interviewer's eyes. The last thing you want to do is just look down all the time and not having the eye contact, because that, you can be nervous. That's another thing. Everyone is nervous on the interview day because it's a make or break thing for what you have worked so hard. But then there's also something called as, being just not confident in your abilities, and that's what shows when your body language is not right. And it's pretty obvious when you're sitting in the chair, talking to the program director or the interviewee. Just make sure you have a correct posture and you're wearing the right kind of clothes. I've seen people come in with weird colors on the suits, like like dark blue. I've seen someone wear pink. No, just you can be We don't have white skin to pull those kind of clothes off, so let's just stick basically to like black or blue color, because that's the kind of thing that American graduates can actually pull off and we look really funny. So it's nothing like I'm just trying to, not make fun of us, but it's just that our skin is not made for that kind of clothes, that it's very obvious when people try to pull it up, it just doesn't work. So stay dress properly. The other thing I always tell people when we do mock interviews is like, we can do 5 mock interviews with you, but that's just 15 minutes. But again, you want to look yourself in the front of in the front of the mirror and see how you do actually when someone asks you a question, because I can give you 10 comments when we're doing mock interviews or anything like that, but again, at the end of the day, it's you who's going to stand in front of the mirror and try to find out what are you lacking, how are you speaking, what are your eye contacts and everything. The other thing is I'm gonna kind of try to keep it really short. The last thing that I absolutely hated when people told me, but it's actually such an important thing when you go to the interview, is your handshakes, right? You don't want to come across as a person who has a very weak handshake. There's something called as a good handshake, and then there's something called as squeezing the hand. It's a very fine margin, but you guys got to learn that it can be like a female, like females can get away with it, that's fine, but as a male, you really want to shake, handshake with them in a way that proves that, all right, so there's certain ways, so you also want to do that. You don't want to squeeze their hand, but it should be a firm handshake to make sure that you come across as a person who's confident in your abilities and you're really excited to be there. So, yeah, having said that, we're kind of running short on time, so I'll stop here. But, yeah, we'll open up for questions at the end.
Thank you, Chinta. This is very eye-opening, I hope, for a lot of our listeners. So last but not the least, we'll move over to Jaydeep, which is mostly learning from mistakes. So Jaydeep went through this process at least twice. So Jaydeep, talk about what mistakes you made and what you learned from it, or anything else that you want to talk about. I know you are on a call, so I'm not going to push you too much.
Thank you, Pawan. So I would like to say you start early, drive slowly, and reach safely. It's really essential to start practicing early for the interviews, be it one interview that you've got, or 10 interviews you've got, or 20 interviews. It does not matter. And that one interview could be the place where you match and where you land up to. So it's confidence, and that comes when you start early, drive slowly and steady, and reach safely, which is the goal to making into the dream residency that we all desire. So something important is not to take it for granted that you don't practice. And in practice, it also means that you find out, you research the programs that have invited you, finding out what interests you the most, and the appropriate questions that you as an interviewee, as the person who will be interviewing, is going to ask the program director or the people who are interviewing. And they also include, you should always practice with a friend or with somebody who can guide you. You can record, or as Dr. Shah mentioned, you can do it in front of the mirror, which is actually a true guide as to how fast you're speaking, whether you're building the right eye contact, the facial expressions you're doing. Yet, in all this practice, you should not forget that it's important to be authentic. Because what stands out besides the practice and besides the relentless hard work that goes in is the authenticity and the truth that who you are comes out. And once you are abiding in that, you are confident. And program directors and program people who are interviewing you can make that you're coming from a genuine place. So it's important to rehearse enough, but rehearse to a point where it comes natural to you. And you flow in a flow, and there's nothing artificial about what you're speaking. The other things, practical instructions would include you seeing the venue, the hospital, much in advance, because it might be snowing in December or January, and you might have problems with the transport. So it's important that you see the place, you find a suitable way to commute to that, be it the train or be it an Uber or a Lyft that you'll take. The other thing is, as Dr. Shah and George mentioned, is to build a good relationship with everybody and anybody that you meet. So be it the first person you meet at the door. And it can be as simple as wishing them good morning and building a good eye contact and a cheerful smile. So that sets in, and that shows that you are somebody happy to deal with, and you would be a good asset to the program. The other thing is to be a good listener. something which, as an IMG, we tend to ignore is we don't listen to the person who's speaking. So it's important to understand and allow the other person to speak. Listen and build appropriate eye contact, and with suitable nods and nonverbal communication, which Dr. Shah mentioned at length. And in this way, the person who's speaking will know that you are interested in their conversation, and then replying accordingly. Not much, not less. So the 90-second rule can be used, but yet making it as authentic as possible, because in true authenticity lies your true confidence. If it comes out as it's scripted or it's artificial, because every second person whom they're interviewing is talking the same thing, why they like IM or why they like pediatrics, or it's all the same thing. But when it comes from an authentic place, when it comes from the heart, the answer is suffused with confidence. And that is what each program is looking. And at the same time, you also display your leadership qualities, definitely not in a manner which is arrogant and brash, but in a manner which is covered with humility, but confidence. And with these points, with a good listening skills and a good eye contact, you can record yourself. Like, that's the best way to know how you're articulating. It's important as a foreign medical graduate to speak clearly and softly, which means when you're dealing with different accents and people of different cultural backgrounds, especially somebody who's trained in the US, the accent might be difficult, for an Indian or a foreign medical graduate to be understood. So in that case, it's important to slow down, correctly articulate and pronounce every word that you're doing, so that you're laying enough emphasis, articulating, and you're understood as to what you're speaking. And above that, it's to just keep a good faith that the program that you walk into is the program that is interested in you. So you also ask appropriate questions to the program director, which should show and portray your interest into that program. And that would include your thorough homework in finding out what interests you in the program. So you should remember that this is not just a game where you are begging for a position. It's also a place where you are questioning and are interested in finding out the highlights and the strengths that the program would offer so that you can train into and give back. So with those motives, the questions should be asked. And each of those questions should show your strong interest. It should not be something which is going to bring the program down by asking a question which might not be taken in the right way, but it should be something which would help you to know more about the program and show your interest into that program. And end of all, I would like to say, in the heart endowed with faith burns the eternal flame of hope, which leaves no room for discouragement. And even if it's the one program that you are called to, make it the best, because that might be the program. It doesn't matter if you get 10 interviews or 20 interviews. It might just be the one program that calls you and is the right place and the best place for you. So use it as the best opportunity that grace has offered to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jaideep. Very, very inspirational, I should say. All right, and I know many of you on the panel may have to go for calls, etc. You're all working, so if you need to leave, that's fine. Otherwise, if there are questions now, we can open up for questions, guys. You can chat. You can put in the chat window, and we'll wait a couple of minutes if there are any questions. I think there was one question on the MSPE, so the importance of MSPE. The format doesn't really matter. Statement of purpose is 690 words. It doesn't fit on one page. That's not a problem. Try to do it. If not, there's no hard and fast rule. I think less than 800 words should be okay. Well, looks like there are not, let's see if there are any other questions. How many programs should we apply to? As an IMG in internal medicine, without knowing any credentials about you, probably 150 is a safe bet, with or without visa. What questions can we ask in the interview? We will have a blog on it very soon, and these are very open-ended questions you're asking. We will have a blog on our website on the questions you can ask in the interview. So that's coming.
Actually, this is one of the things that you're asked a lot in the interviews. What?
Yep.
What? Okay.
Sorry, Rana, you.
Yeah, I was just trying to touch on what questions you can ask. You're going to be asked this in every single interview that you go to, so I feel like having a few questions ready is a good idea. One of the questions that I asked was, the IMGs in your program, how have they fared? Where have they gone on to, do their fellowships and all that, and how did they actually do in the program? So a lot of the programs are very happy to tell you, oh, they went on to do great fellowships. They went on to, because you're also trying to show them that you want to assess if this is the right place for you. You are an IMG, but you want to train in a place that that respects you and where you can come out and you can get the best training as well. So this is one question that I found worked for me. There are more, obviously.
Yep. So there was a question on how important is the PS. So George, I know you have very strong opinions about the PS. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, the PS so the varying importance. Ideally, it is quite important for all specialties, but you have to think about how important it is at different stages. So for calling you to the interview, it might not be that important unless there's something like they glance over it and see some red flags over it, and they decide to not give an interview. But otherwise, when you're actually called to the interview, and during the interview is when they get a chance to go over it in detail, or if they find it striking, they might actually talk to you about it. So in a way, that is quite important, and they will ask you more questions about a certain experience you've talked about in your PS, or something specific you've talked about in your PS. They would like to hear more from you. But it is more important when you talk about in advanced specialties, because they get fewer applications. They have more time to review the entire application, and all of that is considered. I would say it is more important with those specialties, only because that is also used in consideration for asking you to interview.
Yep. Is post-interview communication that important? Yes, we strongly recommend to our students, and we give them tips on post-interview communication. It is very important, especially if there are a few programs that you would really want to match at. We do recommend, build some kind of a network and consistently show your interest. So yes, that is very, very important. And we do give you tips on that as well. Should we send letter of interest addressed to program director, program coordinator? I guess you could do it to anyone. That's fine. At this point, I think all of you should be focused on finishing your CV and personal statement. So the application has to be the first goal between now and September 15th or 5th. Because you don't want to make those mistakes. You want a very good application for them to look at. Should we call visit program? It depends. I mean, we've had other YouTube sessions on that, so you can look at that. If we are applying to both internal medicine and family medicine, can some programs overlap, like about 30? So I guess the question is, can I apply to internal and family medicine in the same hospital? Well, in this country, they look more for a fit. Ideally, if you have a fit for both, you could, but typically an IMG finds it very difficult to justify that fit, and then you need specialty-specific LORs or that demonstration of interest in a specialty, and that's where you may find challenges. If you want, you could. Not generally recommended, and I think we do have a blog on that as well.
And I think sometimes it can backfire. So if you're interviewing for pediatrics and you're interviewing for internal medicine, everybody is like a very close-knit family. And if the program directors happen to, which is less likely, but even then it's going to show that one was just a backup. And that might prove a non-genuine interest into both the specialties that you're applying to.
Absolutely. In terms of preliminary and categorical program, we've answered this question multiple times. We have a very extensive blog. Actually, George wrote that blog, so go over that blog. But the short answer is it's very hard to do in the same program, preliminary and categorical, but there are blogs that we have. If you go to our blog site, and I'll mention it here, and you can read up that blog. Any other questions before we end the session? That's all. Any document that would take us to the interview? A copy of CV is always, and a copy of personal statement is always recommended with you in a folder, but pretty much no degrees or nothing of that sort. And I think George has just copied the blog URL, so read that blog. And all right, so I think that's about it. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, our panelists, George, Chinta, Rana, Jaydeep, and Rahul. Appreciate your time. Good luck to everyone, and if you're interested in interview preparation, our contact details are right here. So a good weekend, everyone, a good long weekend. Hopefully you can take some time off.